While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement, you've tuned into I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and joined today by the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Brynsma. You can check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. We'd love it if you'd share our podcast with all of your friends. It's the I Retire for Him podcast. You know that because you're listening. But we'd also love for you to download our app on the App Store. Just look for Retirement Reformation. You know, we start preparing for retirement almost on the first day of our working life. If we work for a larger company, they make us start saving right away. But in reality, saving money for retirement is only part of the beginning and is only part of the planning for retirement. How much money is nice to know and hard to save, but also where to live, who to live nearby. What are we going to do to occupy our time? Where will we vacation? And what about the grandkids? And some of you, what about the great-grandkids? So many things to consider. And then with I Retire for Him, we're also asking you to consider, what does God want me to do with our retirement years? All this planning is great and very necessary, but what happens when your plans unravel, change, and implode? What do you do then? That's what this 4-part series is all about. So many times we make plans, but life throws us a curveball, and we were just looking for a change-up. Here to parse through this with me is Bruce Brynsma with Retirement Reformation, online, retirementreformation.org. Bruce, welcome back to I Retire for Him.
Well, it's good to be with you, Jim, and I think the topics that we're going to cover in this series are going to be are really relevant and very important.
So, Bruce, most people listening to the show have spent 30 or 40 plus years planning for the retirement. No, I don't just mean the money part, but how they'll spend their time. Why do people spend so much time planning and dreaming about retirement?
Well, I think, Jim, to be perfectly clear, I think they spend more time dreaming than they do planning. Because often the way that the conversation happens, you're out for an evening stroll, and one spouse says to the other, well, what do you think we're going to do in retirement, whatever that time frame is? And then, and the way that they come at it often is what it is that they're trying to escape from or put behind them, rather than a vision of what they have in front of them. And so this makes the conversation, and you can go on and on and on about all the things you'd like to change, but to figure out where we're going to go. Then you mentioned kids and family. What a big deal. You mentioned where, in fact, are people going to live. What a big deal. And matter of fact, let me just share a story with you. Judy and I were, a number of years ago, we were at that point of thinking, what are we going to do in our retirement? That's before God got a hold of us with the Retirement Reformation and said, I got a plan for your life now for what's coming up. But we were thinking about where it is that we would live. And so we approached it, I think, pretty well. And we made a list. We made a list of first 12 and then 8 and then 6 different places where we'd live. And then we said, well, let's go check them out. So let's go find out what that's all like. And we must have spent a year in that hunt and in that conversation. Well, God's plan was different than that, because we didn't end up in any of those places that we had thought about, and couldn't be more excited about both where we are, but also what we're doing.
So you and Judy have been married for 60 years almost. How long into your marriage did you start planning for your retirement years? When did you start talking about it?
It was probably, you've got a bit of an unusual story, and And I think we've talked at various points in time. Matter of fact, we need to have Judy on the show at some point here to talk about her decision at age 58 to become a flight attendant. So at age 58, she got a new career and flew with American Airlines for 10 years. And so it was really towards the end of that 10-year period that we began to have the conversations about, all right, you're going to retire from American. Bruce, what are you doing? What are we going to do? That's kind of when that happened.
And when you talked about those things, did you dream together? Because I think a lot of people spend time dreaming about it and thinking about retirement because sometimes life is just a little rough. Sometimes life is just a little tough, and they like to dream because it feels good to dream. And you were deep into your financial planning practice, when Judy retired from or left or was done at American Airlines. So, what kind of dreams did you guys talk about? Like, did you want to sail the world? What did you want to do?
Well, it became increasingly clear then that we wanted to do something that would give us meaning and purpose. Also, you have the conversations about the money side of things, and you go over with each other, are we going to have enough, whatever enough means. And every couple has that conversation, or
right.
Ought to. But beyond enough is then what are we going to do? And frankly, I think the first 6 months or so of our conversations at that point in time were often focused on, what do we want to do? What is the leisure that we will have? And it was interesting because going through that process, there's always that vague feeling in the back of my head that, man, there's something more that we need to be talking about. And but we weren't quite sure what it was. Well, then as the Retirement Reformation messaging began to unroll, it became clear that it's really not our plan, but that God has a plan. Now we got to figure out then how to be able to understand what He's done to prepare us, and then what steps it is that we're going to take to move into that plan, as well as being able to talk about leisure.
So, okay.
Let me just throw this in.
Go ahead.
Let me just throw this in right now because it's contemporary. We've all been stuck at home now because of COVID for all these times. And Judy is having the best time planning the leisure things primarily that we're going to be doing in June, July, and August. Where are we going to go? Who we're going to see? Where are we going to stay? How we're going to get there? And the overlay over that is, how is God going to use that time for us to be engaged with people with additional areas of meaning and purpose? And so it's a kind of a dynamic tension that's happening right now and in real time.
A lot of times, Bruce, well, and as you just hinted at, when you guys were younger, you really weren't talking about your dreams for retirement. But then when you started thinking about your dreams for retirement, you're thinking, well, what are we going to do? Where are we going to live? And then all of a sudden, God throws you this curveball called the Retirement Reformation. Online, retirementreformation.org. That's almost like an unraveling, because you're thinking, well, I'm probably going to eventually sell my business and we're going to get to travel. Or we're going to get to go see the kids and the grandkids. Because you've got one child in California and another one in Colorado. So, did you feel like God pulled that rug out from under you to get your attention? Or how did that feel like an unraveling, or did it feel like a revealing to you?
Actually, using that rug analogy, it really felt like the rug was being rolled out and that the journey was being laid out. And it wasn't a feeling of, oh, what is it that we aren't going to be able to do? But what is it that we are going to be able to do, knowing that, you don't do 100% of anything. You can build those things into what you're doing, and that it was like an opening door with originally as the rug was rolled out and we walked down that rug, there were doors. The doors opened. First, it was kind of cloudy, but then the rug continued to roll out. And we felt like we were excited because we were on a journey that we could be excited about, both between Judy and myself, with our family, and then in all the ministry activities that He's called us to.
When we come back, we're going to get to hear from a friend of yours about their story of how their retirement didn't exactly happen the way they thought. These are not always negative stories. These are just stories where things just changed. But when we come back to you in the third segment of our podcast, I really want to ask you personally, how did your perspective on your retirement years change from your 40s to your 50s to your 60s to your 70s? And now as you approach 80, what's it looking like? So we're going to get back with Bruce Bruinsma from the Retirement Reformation right here on I Retire for Him in just a moment. But first, a break and listen to a little bit of what we got to say about Retirement Reformation. And then we've got a guest. We'll be right back with more on I Retire for Him.
Membership has its privileges. And with the Retirement Reformation, it's true. We have 3 levels of membership to access our growing wealth of resources. We also provide discipleship and training to bring the Retirement Reformation alive in your life. So join us. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the Membership tab. Choose the level of membership that will help you rethink, retool, reframe, and reform your retirement today. The basic level is free, so you can get started today. Take the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. retirementreformation.org. Let's get back to more I Retire for Him.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. During every second segment of the podcast, we always ask Bruce to bring on a guest to share a little bit of their story. And now, during this series, when your retirement plans unravel, we're asking people that we're doing interviews with people who maybe have a story to tell of why retirement didn't turn out exactly the way they planned. So, Bruce, who do you have for us today?
I have a long-term friend. His name is Leon GOMES, and we have known each other for a good number of years and served on committees together and so on. But it wasn't until recently that I really heard the part of his life story that connects with the retirement reformation issues we're dealing with here. So first of all, Leon, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Give us just a quick, if you would, just kind of a little bit of executive summary of a bit of your career and how you got through those first 68 years.
So, I've had a number of varying careers and I've really enjoyed all of them, but there have been many. My first career was in law enforcement in California with the Merced County Sheriff's Office. After about 8 or so years, I made the decision that it didn't fit well into family life and made a decision at the end of 10 years of doing that. I moved into the insurance and financial services business. Did that for really, I was in it for 25 years, 20 of those years in sales. And then after moving from California to Colorado, I went to work for a technology company that served the insurance industry. So I got to stay in it for a little bit. In between there, I was a church business administrator. And then more recently, was a governmental manager in Colorado doing local governments, or what are referred to as special districts. Typically, those are districts that serve the water and wastewater needs of smaller community developments in Colorado. So that's what I did more recently until 2019. In the August 2019, because of political changes in the board, the board and I had some differences in how things were going to be run, and so I moved on and actually was terminated by the board, which kind of changed my plan or trajectory a little bit there in terms of retirement. I figured I'd do that until I was 70, and then consult part-time with special districts. But when you get pushed out of it, then that changed things for me. And in the last year and a half, I've been the sales and marketing manager for my son's company, which does structural steel for commercial construction projects.
You've had obviously a varied career, but you thought you had it in sight of what that future was going to look like, and then a series of circumstances interrupted that. I know
Yes.
when you and I were chatting the other day, you shared that originally you thought you were going to leave here then, and you were going to move to Oklahoma. Well, that didn't work out. And,
Yep.
and so now you were in a process with you and your family. Take us up then to the current part of the story of your recent decision, and where it is that you're going to move, and then the secondary decision that you made about what a future career or the next step in what God's going to call you to do is. So if you could take us through that piece, that would be great.
Sure. And there were a few steps to it. I mean, as you've mentioned, we've made a decision to move to southwestern Indiana, specifically Lamar, Indiana. We have a property there under contract. It's a little farm property, and our family is going to move there, and in probably about 4 weeks, assuming everything goes through according to plan. And so my thinking up until last week was, wow, this is kind of things have changed, and I guess I need to prepare for the finish line, as I mentioned to you previously. That okay, but what am I going to do? I kind of have to keep myself busy. I've never had a plan to sit on the couch and watch Perry Mason reruns. So
that's because he always wins. He always gets the guy.
He always wins. So there I said, well, let's, but how am I going to put that together? And then about a week ago, I was having a conversation with myself, and that conversation went something like, why am I taking this? Why do I think this is a finish line? Instead, let's have a new set of starting blocks. So I've considered doing real estate for quite some time, and I thought this is the perfect time for that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm looking at getting a real estate license in the state of Indiana, in a place that I've no one except for the real estate agent that's selling us our property, and going from there. And it's exciting because I see it as a new challenge, but it's an exciting anticipation of what God has planned for me there.
So when you've been wrestling with that here just very recently, and you kind of decided that you needed to have a new start rather than an old finish.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about some of your feelings, emotions, perhaps. Has God spoken to you in any way during this process or in your prayer life? Tell us a little bit more about what that feels like, because you're right in the middle of it.
Yes. Well, and really it's, I recently listened to a podcast that referred to the power of the made up mind. And I really had struggled with having something where I made a decision on just retiring, just going across the finish line. And that's a long finish line, I tell you. It's good. And I thought, well, wait a minute. God said, what I heard was, you have enough time left in your life that you can you can start another career. If that's where that's where I'm heading, then I have enough time. And it was about, I haven't done a great job of financially planning for retirement. I'll admit that, and not really where I want to be. So I have the opportunity now to, looking at the opportunity to make up for that, in a sense that I can still build assets, build wealth, leave my, presuming that I pass before my wife does, leave her in a good position, and provide for other opportunities, including ministry and for the the future generation that I have, my son and daughter. So, why not? So those are the things I heard as I'm having that conversation with myself.
Well, I think what you are representing and what you are going through will speak to many people who are listening to this podcast, who will totally identify with, with the things that you've talked about, and to go from seeing a finish line that doesn't have a lot of bright future to it, to the beginning of something new. And you're right, you've got 20, maybe 30 years ahead yet, and the difference that you can make in people's lives. You've always made differences in people's lives wherever you've been. And so now to be able to apply that, I went on the map and I looked where Lamar, Indiana is. And that's a change from Colorado and California for sure.
Absolutely.
So my last question to you is what's your thought about that move in terms of, you said that you don't know anybody there. It's a small town. It's about an hour and a half from Evansville and hour and a half from Kentucky and everything else. So, what's going to be your first step to starting to acclimate to that new environment that you've chosen?
I think it will be meeting people on purpose. I mean, obviously, we'll find a church, but that'll start it. But I think that especially with the real estate business, just as any other sales, business that involves sales, it's about referrals. So it's going to be meeting people and telling them what I'm doing, and obviously I don't want to use the church to get business, but the relationships I build through the church will, if I tell enough people what I'm doing, then it'll result in referrals. Plus, we want to build relationships as well there, as I've done. That was the hardest thing for me in the move from California to Colorado, was building relationships. But that was because I was getting in my own way. So I've learned from that. God took me through that process, and now we feel better. I feel better equipped for another move.
There's a key point right there. The key point is that when either God leads you into different circumstances, He also does equip you for those circumstances. And
yes,
so the way that He has equipped you, and the value of relationships, whether it be through church or neighbors or all of the above, as people there will learn about who you are and how God has led your life and your families. I'm sure that will be good, and they'll look forward to, because of technology, we can stay in touch. And so, yes, thank you for being so transparent and sharing what God has done. I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there who will go, as man, I relate to that, and that they will be encouraged with your decision to be able to begin again. And isn't that wonderful? That's God's grace, isn't it? That no matter what happens with each day.
Yes, and it's so exciting. I mean, it is. I'm really excited about it. So,
and I'm excited. I'm excited for you and for your family. So, thank you, my friend. God bless. Safe travels, and we'll look to follow your journey as it continues to unroll.
Thank you, Bruce.
Leon Gomes, thanks for being on iRetire4Him. We'll be right back with more from Bruce Breinsma from the Retirement Reformation. We'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation website, online at retirementreformation.org, has a growing number of resources designed to help you in what may be the most productive part of your life journey. Let the door open into your last third of life with meaning and purpose, which leads to freedom and joy. Set the loneliness aside and experience the encouragement and support you need through online courses, support groups, books, prayer guides, life direction studies, and webinars, all designed to help find the new direction already planned for you. God does have a plan. Let us help you discover what it is. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org and check out our resources tab. Now back to more I Retire for Him.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Please download our app. Go out to the App Store, whatever your favorite app store is, whether it's on Google Play Music or on the Apple App Store, and download Retirement Reformation. On there, all kinds of access to all the resources we have as an organization to help you find your purpose and your place in your retirement. You know, Bruce, we're talking about when our retirement plans unravel. And we're not talking about the financial side. Of course, that happens sometimes too. You know, I know a lot of retirees in 2008 who had a lot of their money in the stock market. And when the stock market went through that major correction of 20+%, their retirement plans unraveled a little bit. Many of them had to extend their years until they retired because of all that. And of course, all that money has come back and since exploded in the stock market. Well, let's talk about your perspective on your retirement and what that has looked like in your own mind. You know, from your idea as a 50-year-old of what retirement would look like. What did you think retirement would look like when you were 50?
When I was 50, I was looking at my parents and what they were, both struggles as well as joys and pleasures that they were having, and watching how they were deciding, and in some ways being able to speak into it, but to look at what their retirement was going to look like. And it was really very encouraging. My dad, for example, made the decision. He retired as Dean of the College of Fine Arts at San Jose State University, went over to Europe for a couple of years and did some research with a think tank there. And then they moved back to Arizona. And I said, Dad, so what are you going to do now? And he said, you know, Bruce, our church needs a music director. Now, wait a minute. Here's a guy with a PhD in music, first one that the University of Michigan ever gained, Dean of the College of Fine Arts, and so on and so forth. And so our church needs a music director, and I think I'm going to talk to him about doing that. Well, he's the most overqualified music director for a church that you could ever possibly have. But the key to that was he wasn't concerned about the prestige. He wasn't concerned about gee, you've been doing this and now you're going to be doing this. But he was really excited about being able to apply all the experience that he had to build a choir of 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds and to be able to bring joy and worship to that church in Arizona. And I thought to myself, you know, that's the right way to think about that. It's a journey, and to be open to what God has planned rather than my own pride, my own ego, or my own, what I think is going to be satisfaction. So the whole idea of a journey is the key answer to your question.
Well, and that was that perspective at 50. You got to live vicariously through your folks and what they were deciding, but then you hit your 60s. How did you start to shift there with your thinking about your retirement years?
Well, it was in my 60s that we developed a whole new ministry of a coffee plantation in Laos. So I was 64 when we started that little project, and going on for a few years now. And so I continued to look for how is God leading me? And as crazy as that sounds, but how is God leading me to take a next step? And whatever that step is, I will take it and then test it against His preparation and the words that He has for me. So again, a little bit like our previous guest, of thinking about not an end of, but what is my beginning?
Sure.
Of what's next.
I love what Leon said about, hey, not that I'm coming to the finish line, but I'm just getting a new starting blocks. That was really powerful. Okay, so we've heard about your 50s and your 60s, but then you hit your 70s, and all of a sudden, things start to slow down. I mean, your body just doesn't move as fast it's set in your 70s as it did in your 50s, and we start to realize some of our, not our mortality, but just a reality that our bodies are wearing out a little bit. How did your perspective change in your 70s? Because you're not done with them yet, but how did your perspective on retirement look differently than it did when you were younger?
I tell you what was the most helpful to me personally was the gaining continued and new, and it continues on today, but the God leading into the idea of the messaging of the Retirement Reformation. One of the most valuable things was the fact of the understanding that retirement isn't one stage, but there's actually 3 stages in retirement, and they have different characteristics. Because what it allowed me to do is wrap my head around the fact that, yeah, I may be going downhill physically, and in some days I think I'm going downhill mentally, but in fact that my spiritual growth, my emotional growth can continue, and I can have an application. And so that second stage that I'm in now of mentoring and being able to share experiences is being reflected in what we're doing. And then I had a conversation with a young man a couple of days ago, and he's got a bachelor's degree in business. He's got a master's degree in divinity, and has a more confused career path over the last 7 or 8 years. It just bounced all over the place, doesn't have any logic to it. And so as I was speaking with him, and I was thinking about that second stage of mentoring and say, God, what can I say to him that will be impactful and it will be true? And so, you pray and say, okay, what do I say? And what I told him was, I said, young man, I didn't use that term, but his name. And I said, I think God's got a fantastic plan for you. He's prepared you, and you're wandering around like a drunken sailor. You're not finding out, you're not listening to what God's having to say. You're not deep into his word to see what direction comes there. You need a mentor, and you need some boundaries and a direction to go. And I thought he's either going to hang up on me or tell me to go, take a flying leap or whatever. And there was this silence on the other end of the line. And he said, you're right, thank you. Now, we'll see if we can help him to be able to find what God has for him. Well, right. Now here he is in 30. It's the same issues at 70 and 80 and 90. The context is just different.
Well, and we've got lots of resources out there on our website, retirementreformation.org, and of course on our app, the Retirement Reformation app, where you, our listeners, can get access to just a boatload of information. We've got memberships that provide you all kinds of information. Then you can, and that are, some are free and some you can pay for, and get access to actually one-on-one kind of mentoring. What do you call it? Coaching. There you go. There's the right word. Psychological analysis. No, really coaching, just to help you figure out what has God got for you in these years, because God's not done with you yet. Your calling didn't die when you retired. Your calling just shifted. It's still there. What are you going to do with it? And you've got all these years of gifts, talents, and abilities and things. Bruce, we're out of time, but it looks like you got one last thing you want to say.
I do. Here's my word for our audience. Don't be just an observer about life and its future. Actively participate in it with God.
You've been listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, Bruce Brynsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, joins us each and every time. We're Christ followers. We're journeying from this retirement mentality to a reformation of our retirement mentality, so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Brynsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org. and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.